I stood in the dusty shop that once belonged to my late uncle, my eyes taking in the faded shelves and forgotten trinkets that whispered secrets of a bygone era. At that very moment, I heard the sharp sound of laughter, Rachel's laughter. She stood by the counter, her head thrown back as if amused by some private joke, her words cutting deep despite the fragile calm in my heart. "Enjoy your inheritance of junk," she had sneered, her voice dripping with a venom I never thought I would taste. "My new boyfriend has a mansion and money." Each word felt like a deliberate stab at something I could not quite name, yet in that moment, anger did not rise as it should have. Instead, I managed a small, almost defeated smile and murmured, "Thank you." I could see the shock in her eyes. She expected devastation, tears, and desperate pleas for forgiveness, or even a cry for her to stay. But I was strangely empty, unresponsive to the cruelty of her farewell. With a quick motion, she snatched up her suitcase, slammed the door behind her, and walked away, leaving behind an echo of laughter and a deep, piercing void in my chest. I felt as if every step she took was erasing part of a shared past that I could never reclaim. That night, as the shop fell silent except for the creaking of old floorboards and the soft whisper of wind through broken windows, I remained. I took solace in the gentle act of dusting off my uncle's abandoned office, a small room cluttered with memories and mysteries. My hands, roughened by years of working with tools and lost hopes, brushed against a hidden drawer in the far corner. Something unusual caught my attention. With cautious curiosity, I pulled it open and found a small, antique key resting atop a folded, yellowed note. My heart quickened as I unfolded the fragile paper. The note was penned in my uncle's unmistakable handwriting, each stroke heavy with meaning and purpose. The words sent a shiver down my spine. "If you found this, you are ready. Follow the key and trust your instincts." I paused, the sound of my own breathing loud in the stillness of that neglected space. The note, the key, these were clues, remnants of a secret life my uncle had led, now left in my reluctant care. I felt as if the universe had conspired to deliver me this legacy, a mystery wrapped in the remnants of his past. As I held the cold metal of the key in my palm, its weight seemed to anchor me to a destiny I had never sought but now could not escape. I ran my fingers along its intricate design, each notch and curve a promise of secrets waiting to be unraveled. The shop around me seemed to lean in, as if listening to the silent conversation between memory and fate. In that long, heavy moment, I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The key was not just a tool. It was an invitation to step into a world of hidden truths, where every object in this neglected shop could tell a story, and every shadow might conceal a new beginning. I closed my eyes for a fleeting second, trying to gather my scattered thoughts, and when I opened them, I was ready. The laughter that had once filled the room with bitterness now echoed as a distant memory, drowned out by the pulsing call of mystery and destiny. I took a deep breath, and with the key still warm in my hand, I stepped further into the murk of the past, determined to follow the cryptic message and uncover the legacy my uncle had left behind. I clutched the old key tightly in my hand as I made my way back to the dusty office behind the shop. The faint scent of old paper and musty wood filled the air, and every step I took echoed like a quiet heartbeat in the silence. I searched every inch of that cramped room, my eyes straining to see any detail that might have been overlooked during all those years. Then, in the far corner of the office, I noticed a faint outline on the wall, a barely visible seam that seemed different from the rest. My heart pounded as I approached it, feeling the pull of something hidden, something that had been waiting just for me. I set the key against the outline, my hand trembling as I found a small keyhole concealed in the crevices of the old plaster. With a slow, deliberate motion, I turned the key. A sharp, metallic click rang out in the stillness, and the wall shuddered as a section slowly swung inward. Beyond the moving barrier lay a secret room, untouched by time and filled with the relics of a life I had only begun to understand. Dust motes danced in the slanting light as I stepped inside, my eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Every surface of the hidden room seemed to tell a story. Shelves lined the walls, each laden with gold coins that glimmered softly, ancient scrolls wrapped in faded cloth, and rare artifacts that whispered of distant lands and forgotten times. My gaze wandered to a pedestal standing proudly in the center of the room. Resting atop, it was an ornate box covered in strange symbols, its intricate designs inviting me to uncover its secrets. I felt as though I had been pulled into a mystery much larger than I could have ever imagined. Drawn by an irresistible urge, I reached out and ran my fingers along the cold surface of the box. As I did, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath it. There, almost as if it were placed there deliberately, lay an old leather-bound journal. The pages inside were filled with the familiar handwriting of my uncle, each word etched with care and hidden meaning. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading every line as if it were a letter meant only for me. The journal was more than just a record of his thoughts. It was a map, a guide, and a warning all rolled into one. Each entry deepened the mystery, making my pulse quicken with anticipation. My eyes stopped at the very last page where, in bold, almost desperate handwriting, were 6 words that made my stomach churn. You must find the heart's pieces. In that moment, every puzzle piece began to fall into place. My uncle had not simply been collecting old relics. He had been chasing something extraordinary, a legacy hidden in the folds of time and steeped in danger. The secret room, the artifacts, the ornate box, and now this journal. All of it pointed to a journey that would take me far beyond the quiet confines of our old shop. I stood in the dim light, feeling the weight of destiny on my shoulders. Each object in that secret room called out to me, urging me to look deeper, to trust in the hidden clues my uncle had left behind. It was as if the room itself was alive, its silence speaking volumes about the secrets it held. I slowly ran my fingers over the journal's cracked cover, knowing that its pages would guide me into a world of hidden treasures and ancient mysteries. In that quiet moment, surrounded by relics of the past, I felt a stirring of hope. The key in my hand, the journal in my grasp, and the secret room behind me all whispered of a future filled with adventure and the chance to unlock secrets that had long been buried. With a deep, steadying breath, I stepped further into that room, determined to follow every clue and uncover the hidden legacy my uncle had left behind, knowing full well that my life was about to change forever. I still remember that restless night after the secret room was revealed, a night when every sound and shadow held a hidden meaning. I had barely left the hidden chamber with the ornate box and my uncle's leather-bound journal when I felt a chill crawling along my spine. The echo of his parting words, "You must find the heart's pieces," resonated inside me like a solemn promise. As I stepped back into the main part of the shop, the familiar creaks of the old wooden floorboards seemed to whisper warnings that I was not alone. Every gust of wind outside carried an eerie hush, and every dark corner of the shop appeared to hide a secret. I made my way toward the front door, my mind reeling with unanswered questions. The cool night air brushed past me, stirring memories of quieter times before my life was upturned by this strange inheritance. Yet, something felt off. When I reached the door, I noticed that the lock, once a symbol of safety, bore deep, jagged scratches. It was as if someone had tried to force their way in, leaving behind a message meant only for me. My heart pounded harder, and a heavy dread settled over me like a thick fog. I knew that I was being watched. I paused and slowly turned around, scanning the darkened street beyond the glass of the shop's front window. In the flickering glow of a nearby street lamp, I caught a glimpse of a lone figure lingering on the sidewalk, a shadow that moved with a cautious, deliberate gait. Its presence sent a shiver through me, and for a long, tense moment, I wondered if this stranger was friend or foe. My mind raced. Could it be a rival treasure hunter, another seeker of the heart's pieces? Or was it someone connected to my uncle's long-hidden past? I had no answers, only the cold certainty that my discovery had stirred something dangerous. With my heart still hammering in my chest, I retreated back into the dusty confines of the shop, where I locked the door behind me with trembling hands. I settled into a rickety wooden chair near an old table and opened the journal once more, determined to decipher the cryptic notes scrawled in my uncle's familiar handwriting. The pages revealed a maze of hints, names, dates, and mysterious symbols that hinted at an ancient legacy and a world of secrets beyond my comprehension. I read and reread each line, trying to piece together a map that could lead me safely through this newfound labyrinth of danger and destiny. The soft sound of footsteps outside jolted me from my reverie, and I froze, every muscle tense with alertness. I could hear the faintest shuffle near the door, as if someone was circling the shop, testing the lock, or simply watching from the shadows. I clenched the journal close to my chest, feeling its weight as a reminder of the quest ahead. I wondered if my uncle had ever expected me to face such perils when he entrusted me with his secrets. Perhaps he, too, had once felt the terror of being stalked by unseen eyes and the pressure of a destiny thrust upon him. My thoughts swirled as I sat there, the quiet of the night broken only by the occasional creak of the old building and the distant murmur of a passing car. I could almost feel the presence of that mysterious watcher pressing against the thin veil of night, daring me to step outside and confront the unknown. Instead, I resolved to stay inside a little longer, gathering my courage and piecing together the scattered clues from the journal. I traced my finger over the faded ink, silently promising myself that I would follow every lead, even if it meant risking my life, to protect the legacy that my uncle had left behind. In that long, fragile moment of solitude, I realized that my journey was no longer just about uncovering hidden relics or solving old puzzles. It was a test of my will, a challenge to confront the darkness that threatened to overtake me. The scratch on the lock, the solitary figure outside, and the cryptic words in the journal all merged into one undeniable truth. I was being drawn into a mystery that would change everything. And with that understanding, I knew that there was no turning back. Every step forward would bring me closer to answers, and perhaps to danger, but I had to move ahead, no matter the cost. I clutched the ancient compass in my trembling hand, its surface cold and etched with mysterious symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light of my uncle's hidden room. The moment my fingers brushed its ornate metal, a surge of energy shot through my body, sending my heart racing and my mind into a whirl of thoughts and emotions. I remembered my uncle's hushed whispers about destiny and secrets that lay hidden beneath the layers of our seemingly mundane lives. The compass spun wildly for a few agonizing moments before settling, its needle pointing unwaveringly in one direction. This silent command was both terrifying and exhilarating, as if it were beckoning me to leave behind everything I once knew and embark on a journey into the unknown. Leaving the secret room, I stepped back into the cluttered shop with a new sense of purpose. The air felt charged, and every creak of the old wooden floor echoed the call of adventure that now thrummed through my veins. I carefully tucked the compass into my jacket pocket, feeling its pulse as if it shared my own heartbeat. With each deliberate step, memories of past doubts and quiet routines melted away, replaced by a burning curiosity to discover the long-hidden truth behind the heart of eternity, a mystery my uncle had guarded so zealously. I spent hours that first night poring over the ancient map found among the relics of the secret room. The fragile paper, yellowed by time, depicted distant lands and cryptic symbols that hinted at a secret waiting to be unveiled. In the soft glow of a single lamp, I traced the intricate lines with my finger, feeling as though the map itself was guiding me toward a destiny intertwined with my own. One particular mark, a ruined monastery deep in the Scottish Highlands, captured my attention, drawing a direct line from the steady pull of the compass to a place where history and myth converged. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I set out on the first leg of my journey, my car carrying me along winding roads that cut through ancient woodlands and mist-shrouded valleys. The landscape transformed with every mile. Rolling hills gave way to craggy cliffs and narrow passes flanked by towering trees. The steady hum of the engine blended with the natural chorus of rustling leaves and distant bird calls, each sound reinforcing the quiet determination that now filled me. Every turn on the road felt charged with meaning, as if I were following footsteps laid out by time itself. I recalled my uncle's parting words, "Follow the key and trust your instincts." Now, as the compass's needle held steadfast, I trusted that inner voice guiding me toward the relic that promised both wonder and peril. The road was not without its challenges. I encountered narrow stretches along steep cliff edges, where the drop below was shrouded in swirling mists and the silence was broken only by the rush of wind. In those moments of solitude and quiet danger, I found strength in the simple truth that my journey was more than a search for lost treasures. It was a quest for meaning, a passage into the unknown where every moment held the potential for transformation. Under a star-punctured sky during a brief pause at a lonely roadside rest, I sat silently reflecting on the path ahead. The compass, resting securely in my pocket, seemed to emit a gentle, reassuring warmth. Its quiet pulse matched the rhythm of my own heart, forging a connection between the present and the promise of ancient secrets waiting to be discovered. As I gazed upward, the endless expanse of the night sky filled me with a deep sense of both wonder and resolve. With the break of dawn, the horizon blushed with hues of lavender and soft gold. I knew that today, the journey would gain new momentum, carrying me ever closer to that fabled monastery and the secrets it harbored. Clutching the compass tightly, I stepped into my car and drove forward, leaving behind the familiar and embracing the thrilling uncertainty of the road. Each mile brought me closer to a destiny written long ago, a path paved by mysteries and the silent, enduring promise of the heart's power. I arrived in Scotland under a sky heavy with gray clouds and a biting chill that made every breath feel like a struggle. The ancient monastery, perched on a rugged cliff overlooking a turbulent sea, loomed before me like a relic from a forgotten time. Its stone walls, weathered and crumbling, told stories of ages past, each crack and crevice a silent witness to centuries of hardship and mystery. I stepped through the heavy, creaking door, where the cold, stale air of the interior embraced me like an unwelcome ghost. Inside, narrow corridors stretched out into darkness, lit only by the faint, wavering light that seeped through shattered windows. Every footstep I took echoed along the stone floor, mingling with my own anxious heartbeat and the distant sound of wind howling outside. Clutching my uncle's worn journal, its pages filled with cryptic sketches and notes about the heart of eternity, I let its faded words guide me deeper into the labyrinthine passages of the monastery. The journal's instructions pointed me toward a secret hidden within these ancient walls, a secret that pulsed with danger and possibility. As I moved through twisting passageways, the oppressive air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to whisper long-forgotten secrets. The atmosphere was heavy, and every creak of the old building heightened my senses, making it feel as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. After what seemed like an eternity wandering through narrow halls, I finally discovered a secluded chamber at the heart of the monastery. In the center of the room stood a hidden altar, carved from stone and adorned with intricate patterns worn smooth by time. Resting atop the altar was a leather-bound book whose cover was cracked and edges frayed. Its pages brimmed with detailed sketches and writings chronicling the mysteries of the heart of eternity. The book exuded an aura of ancient power, a silent promise of knowledge and danger intertwined. I stepped closer, drawn by an irresistible compulsion to understand the secrets that had so haunted my uncle's past. Just as I reached out to caress the book's worn cover, a sudden movement in the darkness made me freeze. Out of the murky shadows emerged a hooded man, his eyes glinting with a sharp, calculating light beneath the low brim of his hood. His voice, deep and measured, broke the silence with a single, chilling command. "You shouldn't be here." In that split second, before I could utter a word, he lunged at me with alarming speed. The force of his attack set off a hidden mechanism within the ancient structure. The entire monastery trembled as if it were awakening from a long slumber. Stones began to fall, and the floor beneath me cracked open, revealing a yawning chasm shrouded in darkness. In the chaos, my eyes caught a glimmer of light emanating from the depths of the newly revealed chamber. Amid the swirling dust and falling debris, I saw it, a shard pulsing with a soft, eerie glow. With a surge of desperate determination, I leaped forward and grasped the cool, smooth surface of the shard. The moment my fingers closed around it, a powerful energy coursed through my body. Visions overwhelmed my mind. Raging fires, scenes of utter destruction, and flashes of an immense, mysterious power that both terrified and mesmerized me. In the midst of this sensory onslaught, a single, ghostly whisper echoed in my thoughts. "It is not meant to be whole." For a long, suspended moment, Time seemed to slow as I stood there, the shard pulsing steadily in my grasp like a heartbeat. The hooded man halted his advance and observed me with an unreadable expression, while the very walls of the monastery shuddered in response to the tumult. The leather-bound book on the altar lay forgotten as the magnitude of what had just occurred sank in. In that heartbeat of eternity, I realized that my life was irrevocably altered. The shard was not merely a fragment of an ancient relic. It was a beacon of fate, a tangible piece of the heart of eternity that held the key to mysteries and dangers beyond my wildest imaginings. Gathering every ounce of courage, I took a hesitant step forward. I knew that the quest for the remaining pieces of the heart was now a race against time, a perilous journey that would test my resolve and challenge. The cold, misty silence of the monastery, the fallen stones, and even the oppressive weight of destiny itself bore witness to this turning point. Clasping the shard tightly, I steeled myself to venture deeper into the unknown recesses of the ancient building, aware that every moment could bring further revelations or greater perils. With the shard's quiet pulse guiding me like the beat of a hidden drum, I moved forward into the darkness, determined to unravel the legacy my uncle had entrusted to me, even if it meant facing the most unfathomable dangers that lay ahead. I raced through the cold stone corridors of the ruined monastery, my heart pounding so fiercely I was sure the sound would alert any lurking enemy. I barely had time to catch my breath when the hooded man reappeared from the dark recesses of the building. His eyes, filled with a cruel determination, locked onto mine as he advanced steadily. I clutched the shard, the first piece of the heart, tightly in my hand, its cool glow a silent promise of both power and peril. In that moment, I realized that my life had been irreversibly changed, and I was now entangled in a dangerous pursuit that left no room for retreat. I bolted out of the monastery through a narrow, crumbling exit, the hooded man in hot pursuit. His presence was like a shadow that clung to my every step, and with each passing second, I felt the weight of his intent pressing closer. I managed to escape into the murky twilight of the Scottish countryside, where the dense fog swallowed the path ahead. I slowed only when I reached a hidden alley behind the ancient structure, desperate to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. It was there, in the relative safety of solitude, that I first heard a low, measured voice behind me. Marcus Vale. The voice stated, cold and unwavering. I turned sharply to see a man emerging from the gloom, a man whose reputation had preceded him. Marcus Vale was a ruthless treasure hunter, known for his relentless pursuit of rare relics. And he was not one to let obstacles, or unwilling heirs like me, stand in his way. His eyes glinted with the promise of violence and greed as he stepped forward. I felt a surge of dread, but also a strange resolve. I had spent years living in the shadow of my uncle's secrets, and now, faced with this living embodiment of greed, I could not falter. Barely managing to form a response, I recalled the wisdom of Dr. Adrian Cole, the historian who had become my reluctant mentor. I had turned to him as soon as I clutched the shard, a desperate bid to understand the symbols and the legacy hidden in my uncle's journal. Dr. Cole's grim analysis had connected the mysterious symbols to a long-forgotten sunken temple in Greece, where the second piece of the heart was rumored to lie hidden. His warning echoed in my mind. If the second piece was indeed there, I would not be the only one seeking it. Marcus Vale's presence now confirmed that I was treading a treacherous path. A race against time, and a rival whose only aim was to seize the power of the heart for himself. Marcus took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine, and I knew that words would soon give way to a violent clash. With my heart hammering in my chest, I bolted again, determined to put as much distance as possible between us. My feet pounded against the uneven cobblestones as I dashed through narrow lanes and over crumbling walls. The sound of Marcus's heavy steps echoed behind me, a grim reminder that every second counted. In the midst of the chase, I could only think of Dr. Cole's solemn advice and the cryptic maps that promised further clues hidden in the depths of the Mediterranean. I needed to reach a safe haven where I could plan my next move, and that thought propelled me forward even as exhaustion threatened to overtake me. I found refuge in an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of a small village, its broken windows and creaking door offering little protection from the storm of my thoughts. Once inside, I collapsed onto a threadbare cot, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving me with a cold, numbing dread. I knew Marcus would not relent, and that he was as relentless in his quest as I was in my desperate search for answers. The shard in my hand pulsed softly, a constant reminder of the legacy I had inherited and the dangerous journey that lay ahead. As I sat in the dim light of the farmhouse, I allowed myself a brief moment to process the enormity of my situation. I was now locked in a dangerous pursuit, not just for ancient relics and hidden treasures, but for the truth that could shatter or save everything I once held dear. Every decision from this point forward was a matter of life and death, and I could only hope that the lessons of the past and the clues left by my uncle would be enough to guide me through the perils that Marcus Vale and his ruthless ambitions had set in motion. The chase had only just begun, and I realized with a sinking heart that there was no turning back from the dangerous road ahead. I arrived in Greece with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The journey had taken me far from the familiar landscapes of Scotland, and now I stood on a rocky shore where ancient whispers mingled with the relentless crashing of waves against jagged cliffs. I had hired Luca, a local diver with a steady hand and quiet confidence, to guide me to a sunken temple that legends claimed housed the second shard of the heart. As the boat sliced through the dark water, the air was thick with salt and silent anticipation, and every ripple seemed to carry hints of secrets buried in the deep. Luca's calm eyes surveyed the horizon as he readied his diving gear, and with a simple nod, he motioned for me to join him in the small inflatable dinghy. I clutched the worn leather pouch containing my first shard, a reminder of the dangerous journey I had already endured. Feeling its cool weight against my chest as we moved steadily away from the shore, the sea grew eerily calm as we neared the coordinates marked on the faded map my uncle had left behind. Slowly, the outline of a vast, forgotten structure emerged from the depths, a temple swallowed by time and the relentless pull of the ocean. Its crumbling stone columns, softened by centuries of water, rose like silent sentinels guarding mysteries long concealed. My heart pounded as Luca guided the dinghy toward the submerged ruin. Once we reached the temple's entrance, he secured our vessel and helped me into his diving suit. The transition from the warm air above to the cool, shadowed world beneath was jarring, and as I submerged, the light of the sun dimmed to a faint glow filtered through the water. We swam along a narrow passageway into the temple's interior, where the silence was profound and every movement echoed in the still water. Beams of light broke through gaps in the stone ceiling, illuminating a circular chamber that held a quiet majesty. At the center of the room, a stone pedestal supported the second shard of the heart. Its surface shimmered with an unearthly glow, pulsing softly as though it possessed a heartbeat of its own. The sight of the relic filled me with both wonder and a deep, inexplicable dread. I moved slowly, every muscle tensed with caution, ready for whatever might emerge from the temple's dark recesses. Just as I extended my hand toward the pedestal, a sudden ripple in the water startled me. From the shadow of a crumbling wall, a serpent-like creature began to emerge. Its scales glistened with a luminous sheen, and its eyes burned with a fierce, otherworldly light. The creature's sinuous body moved with silent precision, and for a long, breathless moment, I found myself frozen in terror as I stared into its glowing gaze. Instinct and survival surged through me. I recoiled sharply as the creature lunged with astonishing speed. The water churned around me, and panic clutched at my heart. In that desperate moment, I remembered the ancient method described in my uncle's journal, a way to create a resonant sound that might scare even the most relentless foe. My eyes darted around until I spotted a metal rod wedged among debris near a fallen column. With trembling hands, I seized it and struck a nearby stone pillar with all my might. The blow reverberated through the water in a deep, resounding boom that filled the chamber and startled the creature. It recoiled sharply, its advance halted by the sudden noise. Seizing the moment, I plunged forward and grasped the second shard from its pedestal. The relic's glow intensified in my hand, a silent confirmation that I had secured another piece of the heart. The guardian serpent circled in confusion for several agonizing seconds before slipping silently back into the dark recesses of the temple. Luca's signal broke the tense silence, and together we began our ascent through the cool, shadowy water. The journey upward felt endless as I clung tightly to the shard, its otherworldly pulse a steady reminder of the legacy I now carried. Breaking through the surface, gasping in the fresh air, I was met by Luca's wide, questioning eyes. "What the hell was that?" he murmured, his voice thick with shock and awe. I could only shake my head, still reeling from the encounter with the guardian serpent, a creature that seemed to have risen straight from myth to protect secrets meant to remain hidden. As our boat rocked gently on the calm sea, I sat in a moment of heavy silence, the shard pulsing softly in my grasp. I knew that this relic, along with all those yet to be found, would lead me deeper into a mystery filled with peril and wonder, a mystery that promised to reshape my life forever. I drove through the rain-soaked streets of Athens with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding that refused to let go. The night had been long and full of restless memories, and as I stared out at the blurred city lights, I knew that the chase was far from over. With 2 shards of the heart securely hidden away, I had finally traced the location of the third, a secret monastery in Nepal, far from the modern chaos of Europe. But before I could even consider a moment's reprieve, Marcus Vale reappeared in my life like a dark specter. This time, he was not alone. His mercenaries, cold and ruthless, swarmed the narrow back alleys of Athens. I ducked into a narrow doorway, my breath quick and ragged as I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, listening to their heavy boots echo in the distance. I clutched the pouch containing the shards, each piece pulsating with a mysterious, almost tangible power. I remembered my uncle's fading words and the long nights spent poring over his journal. I had thought I was ready for this dangerous quest, yet nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that was about to unfold. As I navigated the labyrinthine streets, trying to lose my pursuers in the maze of ancient ruins and modern buildings, my mind raced with questions. What drove Marcus Vale to such lengths? Was it the promise of power, or was there something more personal in his relentless pursuit of the heart? The answers remained as murky as the midnight sky over Athens. I finally found a safe haven in a small, run-down safe house on the outskirts of the city, a crumbling apartment that reeked of dampness and lost hope. I sank onto a threadbare chair, trying to steady my pounding heart and piece together my next move. It was there, in the suffocating silence of that dark room, that I heard the footsteps again. The sound was deliberate, echoing down the hall as if the walls themselves were betraying me. I raced to the window and peered out, my eyes straining in the gloom. There, standing under the weak glow of a street lamp, was Marcus Vale, his face obscured by shadows and a cold smile that promised nothing but destruction. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. I recalled how, just a few days before, I had trusted him, believing that his knowledge of the ancient relics might help me piece together my uncle's scattered clues. But trust is a fragile thing when ambitions clash. In that moment, I felt the heavy weight of my loss. Before I could react, the door burst open, and masked men stormed in, their intentions as clear as the glint in their eyes. They overpowered me with brutal efficiency, and in the ensuing struggle, I felt a cold, metallic sensation as one of them snatched the pouch from my grasp. The shards, symbols of my legacy and my only hope of uncovering the truth behind the heart, were ripped away from me. I fought desperately, throwing punches and yelling in vain protest, but the numbers were against me. Amid the chaos, Marcus Vale stepped forward, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity as he surveyed his ill-gotten prize. His betrayal was complete. He had turned against me at the very moment when the pieces of the puzzle should have come together. I watched in disbelief as he gathered the shards, each one pulsating with an eerie light, and then he vanished into the night with his mercenaries in tow. Left alone in that dark, suffocating room, I sank to the floor in despair. The room, once a refuge, now felt like a tomb holding the remnants of my shattered trust and dreams. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to accept the harsh reality. I had been betrayed by someone I had once considered an ally. But even as the betrayal stung, a deeper resolve began to kindle within me. I remembered my uncle's voice, urging me to protect our legacy at all costs, and I knew that giving up was not an option. In the stillness of that moment, as the rain drummed against the window and my breath came in ragged gasps, I vowed that I would reclaim what was stolen. The journey was far from over, and though Marcus Vale's treachery had struck a devastating blow, I was determined to press on. I would follow the clues, trust in the memory of my uncle, and journey to Nepal to find the hidden monastery that held the promise of the third shard. Even in the face of betrayal, my quest for the truth of the heart burned brighter than ever, fueling a determination that refused to be extinguished, no matter how dark the night became. I found myself deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where the humid air pressed against my skin and the ancient trees whispered secrets of a past long forgotten. I had tracked Marcus Vale through winding jungle paths and murky streams until I arrived at a hidden clearing, a place that held the final piece of the heart. Before me, in a ruined stone structure overtaken by vines and moss, Marcus stood beside a weathered pedestal. On that pedestal lay the final shard, its surface pulsing with a soft, eerie glow that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. As I watched from behind a clump of ferns, my pulse quickened. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the relic, and his expression shifted from determination to something like despair. I could see the final piece clicking into place with the other shards he had collected, forming a whole that shimmered with an otherworldly light. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the jungle fell silent except for the distant call of unseen creatures and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. The assembled heart radiated power that rippled through the air, and I felt the earth tremble underfoot. The light it emitted was both beautiful and terrifying, casting shifting shadows on the crumbling walls of the ancient ruin. Then, as if the relic had awakened a force beyond human control, the ground began to shake violently. The once still clearing erupted with a roar as the power of the heart surged outward, its energy shaking the very foundations of the jungle. Marcus's scream rang out, a cry of agony and shock, as he staggered backwards. I knew in that moment that the heart was not a source of salvation, but a curse that brought only destruction. The air around me buzzed with raw energy, and every instinct screamed that nothing good could come from such concentrated power. I recalled the countless nights I had spent poring over my uncle's journal, absorbing his warnings and piecing together clues that now led me to this fateful crossroads. His gentle voice and determined eyes had once given me strength, and now, facing the reality of the heart's terrible power, I realized that I alone held the choice to change its destiny. With my heart pounding and hands trembling, I stepped out of the shadows. Each footstep felt heavy as I advanced slowly toward the pedestal, the light of the heart reflecting in my eyes. Marcus, still reeling from the shock, tried to regain control, but the assembled relic pulsed with an intensity that threatened to consume us both. I could feel its energy tugging at my very soul, as if urging me to harness its power, yet my instincts screamed that its power was a poison meant to corrupt. I knew that if I allowed it to remain whole, the curse would spread far beyond this ruined temple, endangering everything I held dear. Time seemed to slow as I reached out a shaking hand toward the heart. In that charged moment, every lesson from my past, every word of warning from my uncle, and every ounce of courage I possessed converged into a single, decisive thought. I could not let Marcus, nor anyone else, become a slave to this ancient curse. I had to end its cycle of pain and destruction. As I stood before the relic, the jungle around me roared with a rising crescendo of natural fury, a final, desperate warning from nature itself. I raised my hand, and, with a deep, steadying breath, I grasped the assembled heart. In that instant, a blinding flash of light exploded around us, and the raw, untamed energy surged through my veins like a tidal wave. The very ground beneath us cracked and splintered, and the oppressive force of the heart pressed upon my chest. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief as the relic's light grew impossibly bright. Without a second thought, I made my choice. I pulled back with all my strength, releasing the heart from my grasp so that it could crash onto the cold, hard stone of the pedestal. The impact was immediate and cataclysmic. The heart shattered into countless fragments, its searing light splintering into the dark canopy above and fading into nothingness. A deep, resonant silence fell over the clearing as the tremors subsided. Marcus sank to his knees, his anguished cries swallowed by the hushed jungle, while I stood there, heart heavy with loss and relief. I had chosen to destroy the relic rather than allow its cursed power to corrupt our world. In that moment, I understood that my journey had never been about gaining strength from the relic. It was about protecting the legacy my uncle had left behind, even if it meant sacrificing what many would call power. As I gazed upon the scattered shards and the ruined pedestal, the weight of my choice settled upon me. I knew that life would never be the same, and the scars of this day would mark me forever. Yet, I also felt a quiet resolve, a promise that I would honor my uncle's memory and guard against the lure of dangerous power, no matter the cost. I had never felt so small and yet so determined in all my life. The chaos of the ruins and the echo of Marcus's screams still lingered in the heavy air around me. I stood among the scattered remnants of the heart, a powerful relic that had promised so much but brought only ruin. The blast of its shattered light had almost consumed me, but in that final moment I made a choice. I chose to destroy the heart, to break its cursed hold forever, even if it meant my own soul would be marked by the loss of its power. I could feel the cold stone beneath my feet tremble as the shards of the relic lay scattered in every direction. The energy that had once pulsed like a living thing was now quiet, and the heavy silence that followed spoke louder than any cry of agony. As I slowly regained my senses in the aftermath, I turned to see the ruin around me begin to collapse. The temple, which had once stood as a silent guardian of secrets, now crumbled into dust and echoes. Every stone that fell was a reminder of the danger the heart had brought into our world. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all that had happened. Memories of my uncle, his gentle guidance and firm belief in protecting our legacy flooded my mind. I recalled the long nights spent reading his journal and the promise in his eyes when he spoke of treasures that were more than wealth. They were truths that had to be guarded. With each passing moment, the chaos grew. The ground shook, and I knew that nature itself was rebelling against the cursed relic. I could no longer stand by and let this force endanger everything I loved. I raised my hand, and in that moment of clarity, I felt the strength of my resolve. I had to make things right. The power that Marcus Vale had sought, the power that threatened to corrupt and destroy, was not meant for any one man. Clenching my jaw, I stepped forward, determined to seal away the darkness that had tainted the heart. I gathered the shards carefully, avoiding the dangerous remnants of their energy, and with a steady hand, I cast them into a deep, hidden chasm revealed by the collapsing temple. As I watched the fragments vanish into the abyss, a wave of relief washed over me. The relic was no longer whole. Its cursed promise was broken. In that quiet moment after the chaos, I realized that my journey was not just about a relic, but about understanding my own heart. The legacy of my uncle was not in the cursed object itself, but in the lessons he had taught me about love, loss, and the courage to do what is right. I thought of Rachel, her laughter that once cut deep, and wondered if somewhere, beyond the pain and betrayal, there might be a path back to forgiveness and new beginnings. The ruins of the temple slowly gave way to nature's reclaiming touch as vines and earth began to cover the scars of the past. I knew the world was healing, and in that healing, I saw hope. I walked for hours under the gentle warmth of the emerging sun, each step taking me further away from the horrors of the ruined temple. The forest whispered its own stories as I passed. The rustle of leaves and the murmur of distant waters created a soft, natural hymn. I sensed my uncle's spirit in every gentle breeze, urging me to keep moving and to find meaning in every hardship. I recalled his kind voice and steady gaze, and the wisdom he left behind in his journal, which filled me with a quiet strength. He had once told me that every treasure in life comes with a price, and that the true worth of an inheritance is measured not in riches but in the lessons learned along the way. My thoughts turned to Marcus Vale, a man whose greed had nearly torn apart the delicate balance of fate. In his eyes, I saw not only ambition but a desperate hunger for control over forces never meant to be mastered. His betrayal was a harsh lesson in the cruelty that can arise when power is pursued without wisdom. Yet, in that betrayal, I found clarity. I realized that my journey was not about competing for power, but about choosing the right path for the future. The relic was a symbol of the eternal struggle between greed and the human spirit, and by destroying it, I had chosen hope over despair. As the hours passed, I began to see the beauty hidden in the aftermath of chaos. The broken stones and fallen relics, once symbols of ancient power, now lay still, bathed in the soft glow of the morning light. They reminded me that even the most powerful curses can be undone by a single act of courage. With each step, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders, replaced by a lightness of spirit I had not felt in years. I knew my journey would continue through trials and tribulations, yet I would face them with the strength of my convictions and the memory of my uncle's love. Now, as I enter a small village at the edge of the forest, I carry not only the pain of betrayal and loss, but also the hope of a future where truth and love prevail over darkness. Every act of kindness here reinforces my belief that even in a world filled with shadows, there is always a glimmer of light waiting to be embraced. My inheritance was never a curse. It was a reminder that true power lies in the choices we make, even when the world around us crumbles. I felt my father's hand tremble as he raised his glass in the bright light of the grand hall. The chandeliers glittered above me, cut crystals scattering light like daggers on the polished marble, each glint a reminder of my own shattered world. 1 year after Tate married Alina, my fiancée once, Conrad Merrick stood before me beaming, as if nothing had changed. He held his glass aloft, a rehearsed smile curving his lips. "Congratulations, son," he said warmly, raising a toast to Tate. My brother mirrored the gesture with a smug grin, his eyes never flicking in my direction. I stood to the side, an invisible spectator at the celebration of my destruction. When my father set his glass down, the clink echoed in my chest like a hammer blow. He turned to me, face impassive. "Rent's due, Kellen, $900 by Sunday. You're an adult now." His words, clipped and devoid of affection, struck deeper than any insult. I forced my jaw not to clench so tightly that my teeth might crack. "Why do I pay?" I asked, voice rough, "while he gets rewarded?" I pressed the question as if my life depended on it. "Because he's worth it," my father replied smoothly, as though discussing the weather. "Worth it?" Tate, the brother who slid into Alina's life and stole my future, was worth a luxury car. I, on the other hand, was worth a monthly rent check. I glanced at Alina, her polite smile a thin veil over her guilt. My ring finger twitched where her engagement ring once rested, a constant irritant. I tasted bile as applause rippled around me. Faces blurred, my mother's eyes watering, friends whispering, colleagues nodding sympathetically. I forced a smile that tasted like ash. The memory of that night when I discovered them in my apartment surged unbidden. Tate lurking behind the door with that triumphant grin, Alina's eyes flickering with shame. My heart had dropped, the world tilting off its axis. My car had slammed into the guardrail mere moments later, torn metal matching the scream in my soul. The antiseptic odor of the ER, bright lights overhead. I remembered Tate calling our parents, soothing them with lies as I lay bleeding. Today, the betrayal felt orchestrated by my father's indifference, his selective love paying Tate while discarding me. I swallowed the urge to yell, to punch a hole through the elegant wall panels, to strip the veneer and expose every lie. But I could not betray my father's vicious satisfaction. Instead, I turned away from the center of attention, letting guests step aside as I made my way toward the exit. Behind me, laughter and music throbbed like a migraine. My shoes squeaked on the marble as I passed rows of banquet tables, plates of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, empty wine goblets gleaming under crystal light. My senses felt muted, as though I watched through thick glass. I tried not to flinch at the stares. Pity, curiosity, satisfaction. Each step away from the ballroom felt like shedding a layer of skin I no longer recognized as mine. When the grand doors opened, a cool night breeze wrapped around me, slicing through my suit like a revelation. The moon hung low over the manicured gardens, pale and silent. I paused, catching my breath as the noise inside receded. The distant murmur of voices became a faint hum, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The lawn stretched out before me, dew-kissed grass glinting under moonlight. I could almost hear Tate's laughter drifting on the wind, Alina leaning into him as my father nodded in proud approval. They would not think of me again tonight. A surge of anger and clarity flooded my veins. I recalled the nights I had spent scrimping for therapy sessions, paying out of pocket despite dwindling savings. I thought of the internships I had crushed myself with, the side jobs to prove I was more than a trust fund. We had built something together, Alina and I, but my father's approval always lurked behind every success. Now, That approval had evaporated, leaving a cavity of betrayal too deep to fill. I pulled out my phone, reading the barrage of missed calls from my mother. Please come home. Tate's frantic messages. Bro, can we talk? Even Alina's number glowed insistently, though I refused to look. I swiped the screen until it powered off, forging a barrier between me and the wreckage of a life I once called mine. My mind drifted to Eden's Cross, a coastal town where our grandfather had once lived. A place so far removed from Merrick Manor that my name meant nothing there. I had made silent plans, packed a duffel bag with a few clothes, set aside a stack of savings envelopes. I had contacts in that town who knew of my work fixing antiques, and I had enough to rent a small room above a cafe. No one there would expect the Merrick name to mean entitlement. I could build something from the ground up, unlabeled by my father's manipulation or Tate's ambition. I took a step forward onto the gravel path, each crunch beneath my feet feeling like liberation. The moonlight guided me toward a slender road leading away from the estate. I felt fear tug at my chest. Fear of the unknown, of failure, of loneliness. But that fear paled next to the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and wasted devotion. I exhaled, letting the breath carry away every doubt I'd held for months. In my pocket, I felt the envelope thick with the remainder of my savings, enough for a fresh start. I straightened my shoulders, inviting the breeze to cool my hot skin. The night air was crisp and clean, freeing. I passed the marble pillars that gleamed white in the moonlight, reminders of the life I left behind, opulence built on lies, privilege balanced on the backs of the betrayed. I thought of the therapy journals I had abandoned, pages filled with my fears and hopes, thoughts that now felt like an alien language. I had once thought I needed validation from a father who saw me as a liability, from a brother who saw my love as an open door. That illusion shattered tonight. I refused another day of pretending I belonged to a family that used me as collateral. I climbed the slight incline of the driveway, the mansion silhouette dark against the sky. I could hear the soft strains of music inside, the final strains of their celebration. I let them be. I didn't want their apologies or their explanations. Tonight, I wanted nothing but to become the person I was intended to be, free from the strings they had tied. I paused at the crest of the hill, looking back at the grand hall, bathed in golden light, laughter spilling from its windows. I felt a spark of emotion, sorrow that I had lost my place, relief that I no longer needed to prove my worth. I lifted my chin and made a silent vow. I would forge a life from my own choices, not my father's ledger, not Tate's ambition. I would find people who saw me for the man I was, not the pawn they used. The path stretched out before me, illuminated by the gentle glow of moonlight and fireflies dancing in the dew. I heard no footsteps behind me, no voices calling my name. I was on my own terms now. I exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing as I stepped away from Merrick Manor's iron gates, stepping into uncertainty and possibility. The breeze carried the faintest hint of salt from the nearby ocean, promising rebirth and resilience. My heart pounded with equal measures of terror and exhilaration. What came next was unwritten, a blank page I would fill with choices I made for myself. I would be unchained from the expectations and betrayals that had defined me. Tonight marked the end of my old life, a life measured by rent notices and fleeting affections. My shoes touched the cool pavement leading away from the estate. I felt my father's empire recede with every step. My brother's success, my ex-fiancée's hollow smiles, my parents' suffocating expectations. All of it remained behind me, trapped in the gilded halls of Merrick Manor. Here, under a sky heavy with stars and possibility, I embraced the unknown. I inhaled one final time, the crisp night air filling my lungs and forging something fierce inside me. I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. I was choosing myself. The world was wide and waiting. I would claim a future beyond my father's reach, beyond Tate's shadow, beyond the pain they inflicted. I was no longer their son or their heir. I was mine. That's when I knew I was done. I moved through the house like a ghost, silent and deliberate. The living room furniture sat in familiar places, but I saw it all with new eyes, as though someone had rearranged not the couch and coffee table, but the relationships and expectations that had shaped my life. I opened drawers and pulled clothes from hangers, folding each garment neatly. A reminder that I still cared about some semblance of order, even as the world around me had collapsed. My duffel bag lay open on the bed, empty except for the faint echo of the air I had already begun to leave behind. I slipped my favorite hoodie into its depths, along with the jeans I'd worn when Tate and Alina sucker punched my heart a year ago. I packed the canvas sneakers that had carried me through late-night shifts and the worn-out t-shirts I used for therapy sessions I could no longer afford. I stuffed away unhelpful memories only in the garments themselves. The sweatshirt Tate had given me for graduation, the shirt Alina wore the night she told me she was in love with my brother instead of me. Each piece of clothing carried a story, but none of those stories mattered anymore. In the kitchen, I gathered the few dishes I owned. One chipped coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Brother," a mismatched bowl from my early days at college, and a fork dented by too many meals eaten alone. I slid them into a plastic bin, stacking them carefully so they would survive the journey to Eden's Cross. I paused when I saw the magnet holding up my mother's latest grocery list on the fridge door. Beside it, a post-it note in her familiar slanted handwriting reminded her to call the plumber and to pick up my favorite ice cream if she saw it on sale. Underneath, taped to the steel door, was a photograph of Alina and me on our engagement night, my arm around her slender waist, our eyes brimming with hope. I peeled it off, folded it gently, and placed it in a small envelope labeled Memories, Discard. I refused to carry that image with me. When all my worldly possessions were packed, no more than a duffel bag, a savings envelope thick with the last of my funds, and a few sentimental items tucked discreetly, I turned to the empty fridge door. The house felt impossibly silent, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to finish this final act. I uncapped a fresh Sharpie and ran the tip across the surface, my hand steady despite the knot inside my chest. My breath caught with each letter I wrote, the ink bleeding through the thin, magnetic paper. The words spilled out in one continuous line. This house owes me nothing, but I owe myself everything. Don't look for me unless you plan to apologize with actions. I pressed the note firmly against the cold metal, using another magnet to keep it from slipping. I held my hand there a moment longer, fingertips tracing the final period, as though I could etch this declaration into reality rather than simply scrawl it on a scrap of paper. For so long, I had deserved an apology from my family. An acknowledgement of the betrayal that had cost me my fiancé, my savings, my sense of self. Now, I was making a vow to myself. I would not return until I saw concrete change. I owed myself that much. I stood back and surveyed my handiwork. The message glowed ominously in the dim kitchen light, a silent challenge to anyone who would come looking. There would be no half measures, no empty words, only actions. I brushed my hand over my stubbled chin, feeling the rough prickle as if it were a reminder that I had grown beyond being their child. I inhaled deeply, committing to memory the smell of the air here, faint hints of last night's dinner, the lingering scent of pine cleaner my mother favored, and the sterile edge of white tile flooring. Everything I had known was here in this house, but tomorrow I would breathe a different air. I loaded the last items into my car in the early pre-dawn haze, careful to avoid the neighbors' windows. The street was quiet. No passing cars, no dog barking, only the faint hum of a streetlight. Every thump of my heart filled the stillness with urgency. I slipped behind the wheel, the steering wheel cool against my palms. I looked at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the exterior porch lights still glowing faintly. I closed my eyes for a second, committing the sight to memory. The front door, the potted plant beside it, and the nameplate that read Merrick. I knew I would not return to that name as it had been. My pulse slowed when I realized that I no longer belonged there, that I had outgrown that name. I drove away without glancing back. The acceleration felt like an exhalation, as though every bottled-up frustration, heartbreak, and sense of betrayal spilled out through the tires into the asphalt. The streetlights shifted in my peripheral vision, creating streaks of light that blurred behind me. My mind was too busy mapping a new future. Eden's Cross lay hundreds of miles south, a place where my grandfather once lived and where I would not be recognized as Kellen Merrick, the son who had failed. Instead, I would arrive as someone who could build a life from scratch, who could cobble together a new identity from the fragments of a broken past. I tried to sleep in the back seat, reclining the seat slightly and wrapping myself in the hoodie I had packed. The rhythmic sway of the car was almost comforting, like a lullaby for a heart that needed healing. But when I felt myself drifting into sleep, I startled awake at the image of my mother's voice screaming into the phone, the panic in Tate's messages, and the cold indifference in my father's voice. I shoved the memories away each time they crept in, remembering that I had no intention of going back. In the morning, my phone buzzed with 38 missed calls. Alina's name appeared at the top of the list, her number blinking like a neon sign. Below hers were Tate's frantic messages. Bro, please, come back. We can talk. My mother's name floated further down, her voicemails a barrage of tears and pleading. But I kept driving, the odometer ticking forward, each mile taking me further from their world. I had one last glance at the small envelope sitting on the console, my savings, labeled clearly for rent, food, and a life outside the Merrick Empire. I pulled off at a rest stop just before noon, stepping out into the fresh air. I unlocked the door to reach for a bottle of water, and my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my mother. Where are you? Please call me. I pressed the ignore button. Let them call. They would see when I did not answer. I walked to the edge of the rest area, eyes on the horizon where the sky met the distant line of pine trees. I allowed myself a moment of regret. I would never see that kitchen again, never taste my mother's Sunday pancakes, never hear Tate's laughter echo in the hallway of Merrick Manor. But that regret was tempered by relief. A relief born from leaving behind a house that owed me nothing and stepping into a life where I owed myself everything. By the time the sun began its descent, I crossed the state line into coastal country, salt tanging the air, sea breeze teasing my hair. Eden's Cross lay ahead, a town so small that no one would know my name. I turned off the highway onto a narrow road flanked by dunes, where the only sound was the persistent cry of gulls. My car's tires crunched on the gravel driveway leading to the Whitaker Cafe, the rickety, weathered establishment where I had arranged for a room. I parked and stared at the peeling paint of the sign, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room. The steady beam of the afternoon sun illuminated the porch, revealing an old rocking chair that my grandfather once used to sit on while watching the tides come in. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sea salt mixed with coffee brewing inside. Before I exited my car, I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small envelope of savings. I counted silently, enough for the first month's rent, groceries, and a down payment on tools to fix antiques. I fastened the envelope beneath the passenger seat where my phone lay face down, screen off. I did not want the world to distract me from this moment. With one last look at the cafe, I climbed out, each step resolute and free from the weight of my family's expectations. I stepped onto the rough wooden porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The cafe bell tinkled as I opened the door, releasing a wave of warmth in the aroma of fresh coffee, cinnamon, and the faint musk of aged wood. Behind the counter stood Nora Whitaker, her gray-streaked hair tied back in a loose bun, as that had seen too many storms yet still held quiet kindness. She looked up from polishing a mug, and when she saw me standing there, tall and tense, she gave me a gentle nod. You must be Kellen, she said, voice soft but steady. No surprise, no pity. Just acceptance. I offered a small, tentative smile. Yes, I'm here to move into the guest room. She wiped her hands on her apron and handed me the key on a simple wooden keyring. Room is ready. No questions asked. I accepted the key, letting relief wash over me. I felt the mantle of being Kellen Merrick slide off my shoulders. Here, I was just a man looking for a place to start. As I climbed the narrow staircase to the loft above the cafe, I thought about the note I had left on the fridge back home. They would not come looking for me, not unless they were prepared to apologize with actions. And I doubted they ever would. Yet here, in the quiet hum of Eden's Cross, I felt hope stir in my chest for the first time in a year. I unlocked the door to my new room and stepped inside. The walls were painted a faded seafoam green, and the single window overlooked a field of wildflowers that swayed in time with the breeze. A wooden dresser stood in the corner, its surface dotted with a few framed photos, pictures of Nora's late husband and the cafe in bygone days. A small desk held a stack of local newspapers and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. I set my duffel bag on the bed and let the tension in my shoulders dissolve. I reached into my pocket for the savings envelope and placed it on the nightstand, a symbol of both my past and my new beginning. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed listening to the sea's distant roar, I replayed the events of the last 24 hours. The note on the fridge, the missed calls, the anger and disappointment I had left behind. For so long, I believed my family would come searching for me, that they would beg for forgiveness. But they had offered nothing but silence and screeching tires. Now, with the envelope tucked away and tomorrow's sunrise just hours away, I allowed myself to drift into sleep. Tomorrow, I would visit the local antique shop, my new source of income. I would introduce myself as just Kellen, not the disinherited son of Conrad Merrick. I would show up with tools and an earnest willingness to work. The thought of spending my days restoring old furniture, working with my hands instead of finance spreadsheets, filled me with quiet optimism. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited about what lay ahead instead of dreading the inevitable disappointment. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the salty air seeping through the cracked window to calm the storm inside. I owed myself everything, and tonight, I began repaying that debt. Eden's Cross was not just a place on the map. It was my refuge, my second chance. As I sank into the thin mattress, I whispered a silent promise to myself. No apologies, no turning back, only actions from this moment forward. With that vow echoing in my mind, I let sleep claim me, ready to face a future built on my own terms. Tate was always the golden child, the one who could charm a room and bend it to his will with a single grin. Even as a kid, he knew how to tilt his head just so to win over every teacher, every coach, every neighbor who mattered. I'd always been the one trailing behind, the second son with dirt under his nails and eyes too serious for family photos. But after he stole my fiancée, Alina, and then paraded her around town like a prize, I thought they'd won. I thought that was the end of the story. Turns out, it was just the beginning. It started with a photograph on social media, Alina's account, to be exact. A gala in some luxury hotel, all white linen tablecloths and sparkling wine glasses. She wore a silver dress that clung to her like it was sewn from starlight, her arm looped through Tate's like it belonged there. He had that same smug grin, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said, "I always win." But what caught my eye wasn't the dress, or even the way Tate leaned into her. It was the watch on her wrist, my design. The one I'd sketched out for her birthday the year before she left me for my brother. The prototype I'd poured months of overtime and every last favor at the local jeweler into, just to surprise her. And on Tate's wrist? The matching version he demanded after seeing hers, the one I'd ordered under pressure from Dad, who insisted it would keep the brothers bonded. I'd given it to him even though I knew, even then, that every time I looked at it I'd remember the look in Alina's eyes the day she said she didn't love me anymore. Seeing those watches again, hers and his, like twin trophies on display, felt like someone had ripped open an old wound and poured salt in it. I might have let it slide, but the internet didn't. A few commenters recognized the design, noted the resemblance to my earlier work, and started asking questions. Didn't Kellen design those? One asked. Another wondered if Tate had bought them both. The irony bit so deep it tasted like blood. I'd left town to escape this exact mess, but Tate and Alina had carried it with them, like a pair of peacocks strutting through my old life. By the end of the week, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it later, a woman's voice shook on the recording. "Kellen, it's Olivia. Maid of honor. I'm sorry, but Alina's not okay. She's unraveling. Did you really walk out with nothing?" Because she's starting to ask questions she can't answer. Her voice cracked on that last line, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to hold. I sat on the edge of my new bed at Nora's place, staring at the sea through the cracked window, the sound of gulls and salt air mixing with the beat of my heart. I thought about how many times I'd played the scene over in my head. Alina choosing Tate, Dad rewarding him, me left with the bill and a suitcase full of disappointment. But hearing that she was unraveling? That was different. That was proof that their perfect world had a fault line running right through the middle. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I let the silence answer for me, because silence had always been my punishment in this family. Silence was what Dad gave me every time Tate did something that required me to step aside, to pay the price, to carry the blame. Now, that silence was my weapon, and I wielded it with more precision than I'd ever wielded any words. I went down to the cafe that night, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolling over me like a comfort I hadn't known in months. Nora was closing up, wiping down tables and humming to herself. She glanced up when I came in, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Rough day?" she asked, like she could see every broken piece of me. I gave her a half smile. "You could say that." Some ghost came knocking. She nodded, like she'd heard that line before. "Well, you're safe here. Nobody's got your number but the ones you give it to." She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, steaming and black, no sugar. Just the way I liked it. "Drink up. You look like you're fighting a war in your head." I took a sip, letting the bitterness ground me. "Feels like it," I muttered. The hum of the place, old ceiling fans creaking, The click of the cash register, the muted sound of a song from decades ago, felt like a barrier against the chaos outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I didn't owe anyone an explanation or an apology. My family was too busy trying to keep their perfect world from falling apart to come looking for me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A couple of locals came in for a late snack, their laughter easy and unforced. I watched them the way you watch a movie, distant, detached, almost envious. I wondered if they had brothers who stole their lives, if they had fathers who made them pay rent for the privilege of existing. Probably not. I let that thought slip away, finishing my coffee with a final, bracing sip. When I got back upstairs, I checked my phone. More missed calls, more voicemails, all from numbers I'd learned to ignore. Tate's last message was a drawn-out sigh of desperation. "Bro, we need to talk. Things are not good over here." His voice trembled, like he was the one who'd been betrayed, like I owed him comfort. I almost laughed, but the laugh died in my throat, replaced by a steely resolve. Let him feel the ground shake. Let him learn what it meant to lose control. I powered down the phone and set it on the nightstand, its blank screen a small act of rebellion. I didn't owe them a reply, just like they'd never given me the decency of honesty. I stretched out on the bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and let the sound of the ocean seep into my bones. For the first time in months, I felt a calmness that didn't feel like defeat. I drifted off thinking about the watches, about Alina's shaking hands and Tate's panicked voicemails, about how easy it had been for them to build a life on the ruins of mine, and how quickly it was falling apart without me there to prop it up. I thought about Olivia, her voice trembling as she told me Alina was unraveling. Good. Let them both unravel. Let them feel the sharp edges of the choices they'd made. I'd spent a year bleeding for them. It was their turn to explain things now. As I closed my eyes, I pictured them, Tate staring at his reflection, wondering how his perfect image had cracked. Alina, twisting the ring on her finger, asking herself how she'd ended up with a man who'd stolen everything he had. And Dad, cold and calculating, watching his empire tremble because the son he'd dismissed had finally refused to be silent. I let the ocean's rhythm lull me to sleep, the scent of salt and wood and old memories blending into something that felt like home. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I was the author now, and they were the ones playing catch-up. I owed them nothing but the truth, and that was already more than they'd ever given me. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd wake up and keep living. I'd keep building the life they said I didn't deserve. And when they came looking for me, and they would, eventually, I'd be ready. Let them come with their apologies, their excuses, their pleas. I'd hold up the mirror and make them see every lie, every theft, every time they chose him over me. Let them unravel. Let them see what it felt like. Let them learn that sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. When I first pulled into Eden's Cross, the sign was so weathered I almost missed it. A battered wooden plank leaning at an angle, paint faded to the color of old bones, letters barely legible in the salt air. But I knew the place by heart. My grandfather's stories had drawn it for me 1,000 times. The smell of the sea drifting through the open windows, the old lighthouse standing guard at the edge of town, the people who wore their scars like medals instead of secrets. I had come here because I knew no one would remember me as the son of Conrad Merrick or the brother who lost everything. Here, I was just Kellen, a man looking to build something from the wreckage. I parked outside the Whitaker Cafe, the engine still ticking as it cooled. The air smelled like damp wood and ocean spray, and I let it fill my lungs as I stared at the small building. The sign overhead, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room, looked freshly painted, a bright contrast to the rest of the town's weathered edges. The windows glowed with a warm, amber light that seemed to spill onto the street, a small beacon calling me home. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and locked the car with a satisfying click, as if sealing away the last pieces of my old life. Inside, the cafe was almost empty except for a couple of locals nursing their coffee. The place smelled of cinnamon and brewing espresso, and something sweet, maybe caramel or vanilla. A record player crackled in the background, filling the space with a low, steady hum. Behind the counter stood Nora, her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a loose bun, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. She wore an apron dusted with flour, and her hands were steady as she wiped the counter. When she saw me, she paused, studying my face as if she'd known I was coming long before I had. "You look like someone who's trying to build a life from rubble," she said, not unkindly, just honest, her voice worn by years of speaking truths no one wanted to hear. I felt my shoulders drop, tension easing from places I hadn't realized it had burrowed into. Something like that, I replied, my voice hoarse from the long drive and the longer silence I'd carried for months. She nodded, as if that was all the explanation she needed, and reached beneath the counter. A small key, worn smooth by time, dangled from her fingers. She slid it toward me. Room upstairs. Sheets are clean, and the view's not bad if you like the ocean. Rent's due every Friday, but we can figure that out if it's too tight. She didn't ask for a deposit, didn't mention references. She didn't ask about my father or my brother. She just gave me a place to start. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I picked up the key and held it tight, feeling its weight in my palm, a solid thing in a world that had felt like smoke and shadows for far too long. I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, each step creaking under my weight, as though the building itself was testing me. The hallway smelled of old wood and lemon oil, and I found my door at the very end. The key fit the lock with a satisfying click. The room was small, a twin bed in one corner, a wooden dresser against the far wall, a window with a view of the ocean that framed the horizon in a way that made it feel infinite. I dropped my bag on the bed and crossed to the window, pushing it open so the sea breeze rushed in, cool and sharp, filling the space with the scent of salt and possibility. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. No one here cared that my father thought I wasn't worth a car, or that my brother thought my fiancée was his for the taking. No one here cared that I'd left behind a note on a fridge and a mess of family secrets. Here, I was just a man who'd come to fix antiques, maybe fix himself along the way. I leaned against the window frame, watching the waves roll in, the tide smoothing out the rough edges of the sand like a promise. Downstairs, Nora's laughter drifted up through the floorboards, mingling with the clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation. The sound was warm, real, nothing like the hushed, polite tones that had filled the halls of Merrick Manor. I realized, with a kind of soft shock, that I didn't miss that place. Not even a little. Here, in this small town at the edge of the world, I had a chance to be something new. Someone who didn't carry the weight of his family's expectations or his brother's betrayals. Someone who could be defined by what he chose to build, not what had been stolen from him. I unpacked my few things, folding shirts into the dresser drawers, lining up the tools I'd brought with me: pliers, chisels, sandpaper, small containers of varnish and glue. My hands itched to get to work, to take something broken and make it whole again. That's what I wanted for myself, too. To rebuild. To restore. To be something more than the sum of all the ways I'd been broken. As the sun began to set, I made my way back down to the cafe. Nora was wiping down tables, the last of the customers trickling out into the cool evening air. She looked up as I approached, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Settling all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Feels like a good place to start over." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. We can always use another pair of hands around here. And you seem like the kind of man who's got a lot of work to do, inside and out." I laughed, a sound that felt rusty in my chest but genuine. "You have no idea," I said, and she laughed too. "Maybe I do," she said, her smile softening. "But you're here now. That's a start." It was enough. More than enough. That night, I lay in bed listening to the ocean whispering to the shore, the sound of the tide a steady rhythm against the silence that had ruled my life for too long. I thought about my father, his cold smile as he handed Tate the keys to a new car. I thought about Tate, the way he'd smiled at me that night like he'd won some game he'd been playing all his life. I thought about Alina, the way she looked at me like I was an obstacle instead of the man she'd once promised forever. I thought about all of them, and I let them go. I let the ocean take them, washing them away like footprints in the sand. Here, in Eden's Cross, I wasn't a Merrick or a disappointment or a footnote in someone else's story. I was Kellen. Just Kellen. And that was enough for me. As sleep claimed me, I promised myself that tomorrow I'd find the antique shop my grandfather used to talk about, the one where old things wouldn't be made new again. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to make myself new, too. The tide rolled in, the moon climbed higher, and I slept like a man who knew that sometimes you have to walk away to find where you truly belong. The attic was hotter than I expected, a low-ceilinged furnace beneath the old cafe's roof. A single dusty bulb swung overhead, throwing shadows that danced like memories across the wooden beams. I hadn't planned on coming up here, but Nora had asked me to help sort through the boxes stacked in the corners, remnants of a life half forgotten, left to gather dust while the world moved on below. I knelt beside a stack of trunks, their brass latches tarnished by time, and something inside me tensed with anticipation. The scent of old wood, salt air, and the faint tang of musty paper filled my lungs. Each trunk felt like a time capsule, a chance to piece together the fragments of a story I hadn't known I was part of. I opened the first trunk with a creak that made me wince. Inside, layers of newspaper wrapped around delicate china cups, their handles chipped and paint faded but still whole. I unwrapped each piece carefully, like I was handling a part of my own history. These were the relics of a man I'd only known through family stories. My grandfather, the one who'd built a life here before my father turned everything he'd touched to glass and cold ambition. I found a photograph at the bottom of the trunk. My grandfather standing beside a younger Conrad Merrick, both of them wearing the same half-smile, like they'd agreed on a secret. I set the photo aside, heart tight. Dad had always acted like Eden's Cross was a footnote, a place he'd left behind in pursuit of something bigger. But here, in this attic, I saw that he'd once belonged here too. And maybe that was why he'd tried so hard to erase it from me. The second trunk was heavier, the hinges stiff with rust. I pried it open with a screwdriver, sweat dripping down my back. Inside, stacks of folders leaned against each other like drunks at a bar. Most were old receipts, invoices for cafe repairs, letters from neighbors. I flipped through them, page after page, until one manila envelope caught my eye. Its edges were frayed, the string tie barely holding it shut. Across the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, Second Will, Eden's Cross Property. My breath caught. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the weight of it 1,000 times heavier than paper should ever be. I moved to a small work table by the window, sunlight filtering through grime-streaked glass. I untied the string and pulled the document free. My grandfather's signature stared back at me, steady and deliberate, as though he'd known this day would come. The will was dated a year before he died, well after the one my father had paraded around in court when he took over everything, when he made sure the Eden's Cross property became just another asset on his spreadsheet. But this will named me the heir. Not Conrad. Not Tate. Me. I read it 3 times to be sure, each word carving itself into my bones. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me like a truth I hadn't known I was waiting for. My grandfather had seen the same man in Conrad that I'd come to know, the man who wore fatherhood like a badge of convenience, who'd chosen Tate's smile over my steady loyalty every time. He'd seen the greed in Conrad's eyes, the way he'd let Tate plunder my life without so much as a word of apology. And he'd made sure that Eden's Cross would come to me, the one who actually valued it, the one who had come back when the rest of them had turned their backs. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, raw, bitter, but strangely freeing. Dad had probably destroyed the copy he kept at home, confident no one would find the other. He'd always been good at covering his tracks, at making sure the world saw only what he wanted it to see. But he'd underestimated the attic, the dust, the stubbornness of a grandson who wasn't willing to stay broken forever. I thought of Tate, his business booming with money that should have been mine, the same business I'd quietly subsidized without even knowing it. I thought of Alina, her diamond ring sparkling on stolen money and stolen promises. And Dad standing there with that cold smirk, telling me I was an adult now, rent due by Sunday. I could see them all so clearly, their lives propped up on the back of my sacrifices, their laughter paid for with my sweat and tears. But not anymore. I stuffed the will back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands still trembled, the adrenaline coursing through me like a second heartbeat. I had to protect this, had to make sure it got into the right hands. I needed someone who could stand up to Conrad Merrick and make this stick. I needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid of the Merrick name. That's when Jasper Holloway's card came back to me, a man my grandfather had mentioned in one of his letters, a local attorney with a reputation for being as stubborn as the tides. I'd seen his number scrawled on a post-it in Nora's kitchen back when I'd first arrived. I remembered the neat, no-nonsense lettering in the sense that Jasper was the kind of man who wouldn't back down from a fight. I pulled out my phone and found his number, my thumb hesitating for a split second before pressing dial. The phone rang twice, then a steady, No Frills' voice answered. Jasper Holloway. I cleared my throat, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Mr. Holloway, my name is Kellen Merrick. I think I just found something you're going to want to see. I didn't give him time to dismiss me. It's my grandfather's second will, the one that names me the heir to the Eden's Cross property. The silence on the other end was brief but charged, the kind of silence that spoke of gears turning and pieces falling into place. You sure about that? He asked, his voice low but urgent. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. I've got it right here in my hands. I gripped the envelope tighter, feeling the paper crinkle beneath my fingers. All right, he said after a beat. I'll meet you at the cafe in an hour. Bring the will, and don't let it out of your sight. We'll make this official. His voice carried a confidence that steadied me, a promise that I wasn't in this alone anymore. Thanks, I breathed. I'll be here. I ended the call and tucked the phone back into my pocket. My heart was still hammering, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was purpose. It was the first real taste of justice I'd felt since that night at Merrick Manor when my father raised his glass and toasted Tate's betrayal. I thought about that moment, about the cold emptiness in my father's eyes, and I felt the anger and betrayal inside me harden into something stronger. Resolve. I stood, brushing dust from my jeans, and glanced around the attic one last time. Boxes leaned in their corners, shadows gathering in the eaves. The ghosts of the past didn't feel so heavy now. I had the will. I had the truth. And I had the means to take back what was mine. As I headed down the narrow staircase, the air felt cooler, sharper, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I stepped into the cafe, the scent of coffee and warm bread wrapping around me like armor. Nora looked up from the register, her eyes curious but kind. You all right? She asked. I nodded, a small smile on my lips. Better than I've been in a long time, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Well, good. You look like a man who's about to change his life. I took a breath, the second will heavy in my pocket, and met her gaze. Yeah, I said. I think I am. And with that, I walked out into the fading afternoon light, ready to reclaim the piece of my life that my family had tried to bury. I closed the cafe door behind me and climbed the narrow staircase to my small room, my mind a storm of thoughts. The second will burned in my pocket like a brand, but I knew that paper alone wouldn't be enough to set things right. Jasper Holloway had promised to file it, to challenge my father's control, but I still felt like there was another piece of the puzzle waiting to be unearthed. My gut told me that if Dad had buried one secret, he'd buried others. That's why, after dinner, I found myself standing in the darkened hallway by Nora's storage closet, staring at the old safe she'd mentioned. A relic from the days when her husband had run the cafe. She'd given me the key earlier, her eyes wary but trusting. You look like a man who needs answers, she'd said. The key turned in the lock with a heavy click, and the safe door creaked open like a confession. Inside, yellowed envelopes were stacked in neat bundles, each marked with dates and labels. At first, they looked like ordinary business records, utility bills, vendor invoices, tax returns. I flipped through them with numb fingers until one file caught my eye. It was labeled transfers, and my name was scrawled across the top in a handwriting I recognized all too well, my father's. My chest tightened as I pulled it free and opened it. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Documents with my signature, except I'd never signed them. My breath caught as I saw the amounts. Thousands, tens of thousands, funneled from my account to Tate's business, month after month. It was all there, black and white proof that my father hadn't just stolen my fiancée, he'd stolen my future. My hands trembled as I flipped page after page, each one a fresh betrayal. I felt a laugh, bitter and sharp, slip from my lips. They hadn't just stolen love. They'd stolen money, my identity, my trust. They'd left me with nothing, all while telling the world I was the failure. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up months ago, leaving only resolve. I took a deep breath and gathered every document, shoving them into my bag. My mind was already forming a plan. I'd send copies to the people who mattered. Jasper, the journalist who'd covered Dad's latest charity gala. Even Alina, if I felt like twisting the knife. Let them see the truth. Let them know who they'd been praising all these years. That night, back in my room, I spread the documents across the bed. The moonlight caught the edges like silver blades. I started scanning them, one by one, sending them to my lawyer, and then to an anonymous reporter in our hometown. My finger hovered over Alina's contact. I typed a message. Ever wonder who really paid for that diamond on your finger? Tick, tick, boom. I hit send and leaned back, feeling a calm I hadn't known in months. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, and it was long overdue. It was barely dawn when my phone started buzzing. I opened one eye, the screen casting a cold glow in the dim room. Alina's name blinked at me first, 17 missed calls by the time I scrolled through. Her voicemails played like a horror movie soundtrack in my head. Frantic apologies, whispered pleas for me to talk to her. I let the messages roll off me like rain on glass. Tate's name followed, 3 voicemails, each one beginning with bro, like that word still meant something. The last one was ragged, his voice cracking. Bro, let's just talk. Please. I didn't know everything. Can we fix this? I could practically see his perfect hair disheveled for the first time in years. Then came Mom. Her voice trembled on the recording. Kellen, please. Your father's reputation is falling apart. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Please, you don't have to do this. She cried like it was my fault. Like I was the villain for telling the truth. I stared at the ceiling, the lines of the cracked paint like a roadmap of every broken promise they'd handed me. But I wasn't the one doing anything. The truth was, the documents I'd sent, copies of forged signatures, bank transfers, the second will, were finally seeing daylight. Jasper had promised me that. We'll put this in the local paper, he'd said. Everyone will know what Conrad did. He delivered. By noon, the expose ran on the front page. Local businessman accused of embezzling son's accounts. My father's empire cracked like glass in a hurricane. I got a call from my old boss, who once told me I wasn't a good fit. He sounded nervous. Kellen, we didn't know your father blacklisted you. You were always qualified. We're sorry. There's an opening here if you want it. I hung up without answering. That wasn't my world anymore. Let them scramble. Outside, the town buzzed with rumors. People pointed and whispered. For years, I'd been the failure. Now they saw who'd really failed. Dad's kingdom was crumbling, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I'd always been unqualified, they'd said. But the truth? I'd been blocked. By the man who was supposed to build me up, not bury me. And now, finally, everything was unblocked. The weight on my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter, freedom. I stepped out into the morning sun and felt the warmth on my face. I wasn't the broken one anymore. The world was. And I was ready to watch it rebuild on my terms. The driveway to the estate felt longer than I remembered, its winding curve lined with manicured hedges that seemed to loom taller, shadows stretching across the path like silent accusations. Each step I took up that drive felt like a reckoning. My shoes crunched on the gravel, the sound sharp and final in the heavy afternoon air. I thought of all the times I'd walked this path before. Head down, shoulders tight, rehearsing apologies for crimes I hadn't committed. Not today. Today, I wasn't the one who owed explanations. Dad was waiting for me at the top of the steps, standing in front of the heavy oak doors like a king holding court. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into that thin line I'd come to recognize as both warning and challenge. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, studied me as though he still believed he could reduce me to the trembling boy I used to be. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was the man holding the truth. He didn't invite me in. He didn't offer a drink or a seat. He just stood there, hands folded, his silence a weapon. I met his gaze and refused to look away. This is your legacy, Kellen? He asked finally, voice low and hard. Dragging our name through the mud? I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Dad. This is your undoing. I just stopped protecting you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick file. Copies of the second will, the forged bank transfers, the statement showing every cent he'd siphoned from my accounts. I held them out to him like an indictment. His hand hovered for a second, then closed around the file. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, the color draining from his face with each revelation. I watched him carefully, every reaction cataloged and filed away. I'd spent a lifetime memorizing his tells. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth when he lied, the way his eyes darted when he was cornered. Today, he had nowhere to run. You think this will hold up? He asked, his voice strained, but that arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. You think you can just waltz in here with a stack of papers? And I cut him off. If you try to spin this, I'll release everything. To the press, to the police, to every investor who ever put a dime into Tate's business. I leaned in, my voice steady, unshakable. You have until Monday to settle. Sign over Eden's cross. Pay back every cent you stole from me. And make a public apology. Or I burn every bridge you've built. The words felt like steel on my tongue, hard, deliberate. He taught me that. He taught me that words could be weapons. His jaw flexed, the file trembling in his grip. You think you've won? He spat. I didn't flinch. I didn't win anything. I just took back what was mine. The truth settled between us like a blade. I saw his shoulders slump, the fight bleeding out of him. He'd built his empire on lies and stolen trust. Now it was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He looked at me then, not as a son or a rival, but as an equal. And maybe that was the worst punishment of all for him. He couldn't control me anymore. He couldn't twist my life to fit his plans. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. And it felt like justice. Go, he said finally, his voice ragged, like the wind had been knocked out of him. Take what you want. Just leave me with something. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of every lie had finally crushed him. I didn't pity him. I didn't hate him. I just saw him for what he was. A man who'd spent his life taking until there was nothing left but dust. I turned and walked down the steps, the file still in his hands, my own future no longer tangled in his shadows. The sun had dipped lower now, the sky painted in bruised purples and oranges, as if the world itself recognized the end of an era. As I reached the bottom of the drive, I paused and looked back. The estate loomed behind me, its windows catching the dying light. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, freedom. For years, that house had been my prison, a place where I'd measured every word and every breath to keep the peace. But now it was just a building, a relic of a family that had eaten itself alive. I took one last breath of that air, sharp, with a hint of old roses and cut grass, and turned my back on it. The path ahead of me was uncertain, but it was mine, and I would walk it without apologies. I'd come for the truth, and I'd found it. The rest was up to him. As I reached the road, my phone buzzed. Jasper's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice clear. It's done, I said. His tone was calm, but firm. Good. We'll finalize everything Monday. You did the right thing, Kellen. I looked at the estate one last time, the dying sun casting long shadows across the lawn. Yeah, I murmured. For once, I really did. And with that, I turned toward Eden's Cross, the sea breeze on my face, and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. It was time to build a new one where the only debts owed were the ones I chose, one where I wasn't a footnote to someone else's story, one where I was free. Monday came with a gray sky that seemed to weigh heavily on everything beneath it, a fitting backdrop for the reckoning I'd set in motion. I arrived at Jasper Holloway's office early, the manila folder in my hand like a key to a door I'd waited my whole life to open. Jasper's assistant led me to his office, a cozy room lined with old books and worn leather chairs. The smell of coffee and aged paper calmed me, a reminder that some places still felt human. Jasper sat behind his desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he scanned the documents I'd given him. He looked up, his eyes sharp and satisfied. They're ready to settle, he said. Your father's legal team contacted me first thing this morning. They want this quiet, no drawn-out court battles, no headlines that tarnish the Merrick name. You'll get everything your grandfather left you, plus full restitution for the money they siphoned from your accounts. And your father has agreed to a public apology. He paused, studying my face. It's everything we asked for, Kellen. It's more than fair. I let the words sink in, the enormity of them. For years, my father had treated my life like an inconvenience, a place to dump his mistakes. Now he was being forced to acknowledge what he'd done. Not in whispers, not behind closed doors, but in front of the world. I felt a tremor of something like triumph, though it didn't feel as sweet as I'd once imagined. It felt necessary, like setting a broken bone straight. Tate, too, had taken his share of the blow. Jasper had shown me the documents. His startup investors had fled the moment the embezzlement story broke. The business that had once made him the golden child was now a castle of sand dissolving in the tide. I wondered if he'd ever understand the price of building your success on someone else's sacrifice. Alina had called me twice that morning, her messages a jumble of apologies and explanations. But I deleted them without listening. She'd made her choice the day she left me for my brother. Some bridges don't just burn, they collapse. I signed the papers with a steady hand, the pen gliding over the pages like a final signature on an old wound. Jasper notarized everything, his seal pressing into the paper with a quiet finality. You did it, Kellen, he said, his voice low but proud. You took your life back. I nodded, my chest tight with the weight of it. Yeah, I murmured. I did. We left his office together, stepping into the damp morning air. The clouds threatened rain, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Jasper clapped me on the shoulder. "I'll handle the filings," he said. "You go live your life." He smiled, the kind that made me feel like I'd done more than win a legal battle. I'd won something bigger, my freedom. I drove straight to the estate, the deed to Eden's Cross in my pocket, the apology letter from my father waiting in the glove compartment. The driveway seemed shorter this time, less imposing. The house loomed, but it no longer felt like it could swallow me whole. My mother met me at the front steps, her eyes red, her hair pulled back like she'd aged 10 years since the last time I'd seen her. She reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Kellen, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have." Her words trailed off, tears brimming. I squeezed her hand, feeling an ache of something like forgiveness. "It's done now, Mom," I said gently. "He's not my responsibility anymore." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and I felt a pang of sadness for the woman who'd stood by him for so long. But I couldn't carry her guilt, too. I had my own life to rebuild. Inside, I found Dad in his study, the place where he'd orchestrated every betrayal. He looked smaller now, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He held the apology letter in one hand, the other drumming nervously on the desk. He looked up when I entered, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. I raised a hand, cutting him off. "You have until tomorrow to make the apology public," I said, my voice calm. "Don't think for a second I'll hesitate to release everything if you don't. You signed the settlement. I expect you to honor it." His eyes darted away, shame or fear, I couldn't tell. "All right," he whispered. "All right." I turned and walked out, each step freeing me a little more. I didn't need to hear his excuses. He'd already said enough. I drove back to Eden's Cross with the deed in my hand, the apology letter a folded piece of paper that no longer defined me. Nora was waiting in the cafe, a cup of tea steaming on the counter. She looked up and smiled, her eyes warm and knowing. "Well," she said, "looks like you stopped disappearing." I let out a slow breath, the weight finally lifting. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "I think I did." I took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth fill the cracks that betrayal had left behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, and the world, for once, felt like it belonged to me. The night sky over Eden's Cross stretched wide and deep, a canvas of stars and salt air, reminding me of the bonfires my grandfather used to build on the beach, gatherings of neighbors, the glow of laughter and music weaving through the dark. I'd always thought those nights were just a piece of his charm, a relic of simpler times. But now, standing on the sand with the cool wind at my back, I saw it differently. Those bonfires were about community, about giving people a place to feel seen and safe when the world felt cold. That's what I wanted to build. Not for my father. Not for Tate. For me, and for every kid who'd been told they didn't matter. The Firelight Foundation started as an idea scrawled on a napkin in Nora's cafe, a name that felt like a promise. I poured every cent of my restitution into it. A program for young adults who'd been pushed aside by family, by the system, by life itself. A place where they could learn skills, woodworking, painting, antique restoration, anything that gave them a chance to reclaim their worth. Nora joined the board without hesitation, her eyes shining with the same stubborn kindness that had offered me a room when no one else would. Jasper handled the legal side, weaving my grandfather's will into the very bones of the foundation so no one could take it away. I gave the first talk myself, standing in front of a handful of skeptical faces in a repurposed warehouse that still smelled of salt and sawdust. I told them my story, not as the victim of a powerful father, but as a man who'd found his way out of the shadows. I spoke about being a son, a fiancé, a scapegoat, about learning that sometimes the people you think you need most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, and how that pain doesn't have to define you. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of every shared story pressing down on us like a heartbeat. Afterward, one of the guys, just 20, thin as a reed, with bruises on his arms he didn't bother to hide, came up to me. "You really got out?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, and he looked down, his eyes shining. "Then maybe I can too." That's when I knew. This was where I was meant to be. Not in the halls of Merrick Manor, not in Tate's shadow, but here, helping build a fire that no one could snuff out. The first months were hard, funding was tight, and every setback felt personal. But each time I saw one of those kids walk through the door, head held a little higher, eyes a little clearer, I knew we were on the right path. Nora kept the coffee brewing, Jasper kept the wolves at bay, and I kept showing up. That's what mattered most, showing up. Not just for them, but for myself. In the end, I didn't need my father's approval or Tate's envy or Alina's apologies. I needed my own courage to step into the light. The Firelight Foundation became more than a program. It became my family, a place where every scar was a story, and every story was a reason to keep fighting. And in their eyes, I finally saw myself, not as the disappointment they'd always whispered about, but as the one who got away and thrived.